Hello, here we are in the garden environment again, which is good because it enables me to show you lots of things that are around us in nature, the world around us, which is important for us to understand. I came across this earlier. Just like you to have a look at it. What do you think that is? What do you think it is? I'll tell you, it's a moth. The moths come in all shapes and colours. Some of them even disguise themselves with owls' faces on their backs. So when birds come down to try and eat them, they open their wings and they think it's an owl's face and they fly away. So if ever you come across, if you've got some time, Google moths with an owl's face and you'll be amazed. They've got owl's eyes, actually just like an owl's face. Incredible. Now, I'm setting this up because I'm going to have a look at it through this. Now, you've used these in the lab, but you've used the bigger, more sophisticated, technical ones than this, the modern ones. This is quite an old one. This is probably, I don't know, 60s, late 60s, something like that. But it works off the same principle the microscope does. You've got the lens in the top, and you've got a lens here. And this one, working together with this one, magnifies what you look at underneath. It says here 5, 10. Can't see that one, that should be 20, so it goes up in fives. That will magnify what you look at bigger. Now, I've put a picture onto the classroom because I want you to be able to draw and label this. It is very important. All the way through your school years, you need to learn the parts of the microscope. At our age, it's our year group, we just need to know that that's the eyepiece lens, that is the focusing reel, this, and you might think for obvious reasons, it's called the stage. Now, it's called the stage because it's what we put our sample onto, and that's called the stage. Now, your picture that you'll see will be like this. So you draw the eyepiece lens and label it. That's your focusing reel, that's your stage, and this here is called the base. It's the base because it's what sits on the bench, on the ground, not on the ground, but on the table, on the bench. So that's your microscope. That's probably all I can do with you really, because I can't show you inside. But when I say the focusing reel, when you put your sample onto the stage, if you've done yourselves in the lab, you look down here, and then that, I can see that very nicely, brings it into focus, so it's clear. It gives you a sharper image. Now, we'll be doing this when you get back to school, but I want you to be able to understand the parts of it. It's very important all the way through school life. Secondly, last week I was very impressed with the pictures that you sent me of the plants, and most of you, I think all of you, even mentioned, and I didn't mention this, you mentioned when we've got the roots coming down like that, and there's the stem, and there's the leaves. You drew far better than me. You even mentioned, what are these? They're called root hairs. And I was amazed when I saw this because I hadn't mentioned it to you. So well done to you. You'd obviously done your research and you'd even said what they do. And what they do, just to remind ourselves, they help to absorb the water and minerals from the soil, or whatever you may put them in. You can just put them in water. But the root hairs, because there's so many of them, they enable more and more water and minerals to get into. Can you remember what I said that was called? That vessel? I said it was called a xylem. And I was amazed at that as well, that you'd put that in. You'd even talked about the leaves and what happens in the leaf as far as, do you remember that's concerned? The stomata, you mentioned that. I was very, very impressed, very impressed. It was a pleasure to see. And at the rate at which we're going like this, we're just going to be flying ahead. So well done, very impressive. Now, I've got a few things here that I want to talk to you about. Now, we're going to be looking at ourselves and food, diet and food, but the balanced diet, the correct nutrition and all the rest of it. We talked about it last year, but I want to put things together before you start to move into year 4. For example, we've looked at rocks and soils, we've looked at materials, We've looked at variation between all of us in class, height, sizes, hair colour, eye colour, things like that. Looked at teeth, looked at skeleton. I want to start putting things together now. So when you're in year 4, everything is all sorted, or when you're into year 5, everything is sorted there as well. So that's what we need to do this time of the year, is to put things together. So what I will mention before we talk about how important food is and how important plants are as far as food is concerned, I want to talk to you about this. Now, I said to you last week, be here now, being in the wilderness, I mentioned to you last week that plants make their own food. They do, in the form of this. Can you see that? That is sugar, right? But in plants, it's the correct word for sugar is glucose. Now, plants make glucose in the leaves. Now, there's your glucose. And you're probably thinking, why have you got potato there? Because I'm going to demonstrate why they store the glucose. Now, if I was to get this and pop it in the water, the glucose, it dissolves. If I was to get this potato, it doesn't. It's insoluble. That's the correct term for it. Now, if I was to say to you, this is made from this, how come this one dissolves and this one doesn't? And they're both made in the leaf. I don't mean the potato's made in the leaf, but what this turns into is made in the leaf, and it's called starch. Now, starch, there we go, starch is made from glucose. And you think to yourself, well, why is that one not dissolving but that one does? And that is because your starch, which potatoes contain a lot of, right, is insoluble because, let's say these are little grains of glucose like this. There's your glucose. In the form of starch, if I put glucose there and starch there, the difference between the glucose and the starch is, there's your glucose. What the plant does, which is very clever, it chains the glucose together. And because they're chained together, called bonds, they don't dissolve. And the reason that the plant does that is because if it stored it as glucose and it rained, what would happen? The glucose would wash away from the leaf. So the plant, therefore, that's a nice leaf. You can see all the vessels there and the xylem. Now, what happens is the leaf traps the energy, the light from the sun, and it makes this glucose. Once it's made this, it then binds it, chains it together in bonds, and it can store it then without it being washed away. Now, I can prove this to you by doing an experiment that I did earlier, because I have to use a special chemical. Now, I use the special chemical for a particular reason. Now, like I've said, the leaf stores the glucose as starch, and it does that so it won't be washed away. Now, starch is very useful. We eat it, animals eat it, and it's part of our main diet, which is why it is important for me to show you all of this first before we start talking about diet, because without these things we wouldn't be around. Life on Earth would not exist because everything is dependent upon plants. You'll be amazed the amount of things that are from plants, like oils, colours, all kinds of things. And that's something that we can look at later on. But this stuff here is called iodine solution. And if you put this on starch, it goes from its red colour to a purpley black. Now, there's a bit much there. So if I pop it on this potato, I said this potato contains starch, didn't I? Now, if there's starch in this potato, then it will go purpley black. There we are. Now, can you see all those little tiny, thousands of little black dots? They are what's called starch granules, which are these. Now, when a potato is cooked, those starch granules break open and release the glucose. The bonds break and the glucose gets released and it becomes sweeter, which is why vegetables are sweeter when they're cooked, because the starch, like you can see there, can you see that? Opens up and releases all of the sugars. So that shows how important starch is for storage. Now, we can't get to the starch in this leaf because we've got this green colour on it. Now this green colour is called chlorophyll. It's a bit of, I don't expect you to remember this word. It's a really long word that you'll come across later on. But this is what gives a plant its colour, chlorophyll. Now in order to be able to look at where the starch is on a leaf, we need to remove this coat. And that's what I did earlier with this chemical. Can you see in there, all the green colour from the leaf has come out. Not as well as I'd like it to have done actually, but it will still give us an idea. You can see here where the leaf has gone very pale because I've removed this green colour called chlorophyll, like I said. Now what we can do here is, first of all, actually what I had to do was dip that in hot water to remove its waxy layer to get to the green colour. Then I put it in this special chemical, and then the chemical removes the chlorophyll in there. Look, some of those leaves have broken up. Now, like I said earlier with a potato, watch. Can you see all you can see all the starch granules there, look. You see them in the potato? That potato's got a lot of energy. And this is why it's important for me to show you this before we go on and look at the importance of food. Now, what I'm going to try and do now, hopefully this will work. Let's see whether we can see any starch granules appear in these leaves. Look at that. You see that? Now this liquid is called iodine, or iodine rather, and it's used a lot. It's actually used as an antiseptic, antimicrobial antiseptic. But can you see all the starch in that leaf now? Now if I was to get this one, it'd just bounce off it because you've got this waxy layer, see? Because the leaf is waterproof. But unlike this one, to get rid of that, this one, I'm pleased with that actually. I didn't think that was going to turn out that well. There we go. Look at all the starch in that leaf. Now, there are many, many organisms, animals, insects, birds, reptiles, all of the groups that eat plants. We eat plants. I've just given you an idea. Yeah, there's one. That's come from a plant. Now last week I showed you celery. Now I forgot to bring it out actually, but at the top of it are all the leaves. So we actually eat the stem of the celery. We eat all parts of the plant. We eat leaves. What salad? Lettuce, cabbage, they are leaves of the plant. We eat them. We eat them because of all the starch that's in there. Some people, some animals, eat animals that eat plants, called a food chain. For example, you'll get a cabbage, you'll get a caterpillar that eats the cabbage, and then you'll get the bird that eats the caterpillar. So the bird eats the caterpillar eats the cabbage, and all of that energy goes into the bird because the bird's bigger and it needs that energy. That is how important plants are. They are always at the start of the food chain, and they are called producers. Very, very important that we look at this before we move on. Very important. So let's recap then. Firstly, I showed you the microscope, which I want you to draw and label. I've put a picture on. There's a reason for that. In biology, there's a lot of drawing and labeling, right? Whether it's part of the body systems, whether it's part of the plants. What you did last week was marvellous. If you could do the same kind of job this week with a microscope, and then I've got another task for you. I've mentioned 3 plants. Yeah, I don't know. That'll be on when we get back to school. I've mentioned 3 plants to you. I mentioned cabbage. We eat that. I mentioned, what else did I mention? You tell me. I want you to be able to have an appreciation of how important plants are. I want you to list me as many as you can of the plants that we eat. Cabbage. I mentioned lettuce. I mentioned celery. They're all plants. We eat them. What else? What else comes from a plant that we eat? Now, this time of year, there are fruits that are very popular. They're from plants. You've had them yourself. And what I want you to do is name as many plants that we eat as you can. I've mentioned cabbage, celery, lettuce. I want you to do that because when you've done that and we sit back and we look at the list, you'll go, wow, no wonder plants are so important, which is why I've started with this. I've mentioned to you that plants store their sugars that we need as glucose, right? As starch, from glucose to starch, and that the starch, individual glucose, are bound together like chains called bonds. And when they're bonded like that, like I mentioned earlier, they won't dissolve. You've got special chemicals in your body that break these bonds down and make them into glucose called enzymes. I'll talk to you about that later on. You don't need to know that now. But the tasks that I want you to do today are the microscope, because that's so important. Here it is. Eyepiece lens, focusing reel. What did I say that was called? I said it was called the stage, and that's the base. That's all I need you to know in year 3 and 4. Right? Later on we'll go a bit stage further. The iodine is detected. Look at that one. Look at the amount of starch in there. Now, we also eat other foods that have got starch in because they're made from plants. But I'll talk to you about that next week because I'm going to show you how to do food tests. I'm going to show different amounts of food, different types of foods, and I'm going to use this to detect whether it's got starch in or whether it hasn't. If it's got something else in, it may have protein in or fats. So, first things first. Well done for the plant that you drew. Superb. Microscope, write out as many as you can of foods that come from plants. And I'll see you soon.